do a tutorial today. We're going to expand on the no-spin Skanf system format of throwing knives. So if you haven't seen the first tutorial I put out a few months ago, take a look at that because we're going to build up on that. The first one shows basically phase one of Skanf knife throwing. It looks something like this. So I didn't think about putting it this way before, but the phases are actually going to just be the arms placement relative to the body. Phase two is going to look like this. And this is where our elbow is now no longer extending past the body, unlike phase one where the whole arm shot forward. And phase three, this is eventually what we're going to reach into, and I'll explain a little bit more later how to focus on this one. You notice phase three looks very much like how you see a lot of Skanf practitioners throw, where the arm almost never leaves the side or goes past the side. It stays right here, it never goes outward. So how do you do phase two? Well, you got to understand what was the point of phase one. Phase one is teaching you one axis of rotation, one point of rotation, which is your shoulder, right? And if you think of a bullwhip, when you crack a bullwhip, there are a few ways you could crack a bullwhip. You can do a slashing style cracking, right? Which then it'll swipe all the way down at this diagonal. Or you can do target cracking, like you're trying to snuff out a candle that's specifically right here, and it's gonna look something like this. Now, if you try to do this with your arm that's dead, and you try to imagine snuffing out the candle, it looks something like this, right? The elbow stays down unless you really wind it up and it goes up here, but that's not our goal, because if it goes up here, it's hard to properly straighten it out. It just wants to swing again. So you have to balance it out and then shoot it forward. And when you pull the hips forward, notice how it pulls everything else and snaps right at that point. So it's teaching you rotation at the shoulder, but it's also covering up a few other things. In phase one, so backtrack. Insight number one, your rotation point is your shoulder. Insight number two, you are creating two waves when you're throwing the knife. The first one is the loading wave, right? And the second is the launching wave. What's important here is right between loading and launching, you're creating this tug on the finger. Remember how I said in Skanf, you are not actively pushing the knife, right? You're focused on pulling the knife. That's not to say that there's no pushing at all. That's to say that you're not focused on pushing the knife actively. What we're gonna rely on is passive pushing that comes from the flex of the finger wanting to return back into position when there's force pushing it back. It wants to flick back into position, okay? That's what we're gonna use. And to create that tension, we need to have the knife going back where it's pushing against the finger, right? It's pushing against the finger and the finger wants to flex back. When it wants to flick back, it's applying that natural push for you. It's going to naturally and passively apply the brushing for you, or the springing for you, or the pushing for you to slow down and counteract the rotation so you have no spin. It takes that out of the equation so you don't have to think about it. So it's basically almost like auto-correcting your no spin without having to worry about it. So the first wave creates that tension on the finger. The second wave pulls. Insight number three. If you remember in the first tutorial, I mentioned that for a catapult, if this was a catapult, its full range of motion is basically launched all the way to the end. But even if you stop it halfway, your rock, right, or your knife in this case, whatever is in the catapult launcher will still fly, even when you stop. So if our hips were the catapult, and our rock was a combination of this whole arm with the knife, then when we stop here, right, everything gets launched here. Key word, everything gets launched here, not launched out here, it launched here, right? So the only thing we have in control is just maintaining a closed hand grip. Everything else is basically almost relaxed, and you're just letting that natural, target cracking that I mentioned earlier play out. The force of the throw will pull the knife out of your hand for you. The flex of the finger will naturally apply the pressure that's necessary to straighten out the knife, and it should be automatically balanced to allow it to pretty much be within range of no spin. meaning that you don't under rotate too much, you don't over rotate too much, right? So it's all put together. So insight number 3, your launching point has always been here. When you launched, at the time, our rock was the whole arm, so it went forward. In phase 2, how do we get to phase 2? We're redefining the catapult. This time the catapult is made up of our hips with our elbow attached to it. In phase 1, it was released from it. Now we're attaching to it. So when you finish, your arm might end up following through, right? And that's fine. That's fine. But that's the next phase. And it's teaching you rotation point number 2, which is your elbow. First rotation point is your shoulder. Second rotation point is your elbow. And of course, phase 3, your final rotation point is your wrist. So try to give that a go. Put more focus on that now. And remember, everything else is relaxed. You're just letting everything flow and snap accordingly. Give that a try. And well, before you do, keep in mind that knife throwing is a dangerous hobby. So if you are gonna give this a go, you are doing so at your own risk. But with that said, if you are gonna give it a go, make sure you take the necessary safety precautions. Do not throw at any living animal or any other person. Take into account rebounds and ricochets, and train safe. Have fun.